Okay, everybody, welcome back. So today we're going to get a bit more practical, and what I'm going to try to give over to you is an overview of what heals fibromyalgia, an overview of like what are the steps that actually need to happen and sort of that you actually start to heal and get better. So like we've talked about before, the mainstream view is that what is fibromyalgia, what causes it? Well, it's just central sensitization. The brain and the nerves are too sensitive, so you hurt. We don't know what it causes it, so take these drugs and do psychotherapy and exercise and you'll be okay. And we all know that that doesn't work for a lot of people, or maybe it works for a while and it stops helping, because underneath fibromyalgia, underneath central sensitization, there's a number of different physiologic dysfunctions and imbalances that are driving the whole process. And so we talked about chronic inflammation, and especially inflammation of the brain itself. We talked about dysfunction of the mitochondria, which are the organs that actually produce cellular energy, and then imbalance and dysregulation of the stress response and all of the biochemistry of the stress hormone system that gets out of balance. And those are the core things, like a triangle, that are all interacting with each other. Those things, those mechanisms, are all completely related to each other, and that's very well established in the scientific literature. On top of that, there's sort of more the outer circle of dysfunctions that happen. So we all know it's hard to sleep with fibromyalgia. We all know that many of us have anxiety and depression, and we also know that there's irritable bowel syndrome. Can't eat, you get cramps in the belly, can't move. We all know that there's, let me just check my little board so I don't forget anything. Right, there's the pain itself, and the fatigue itself, and the tendency to get deconditioned because it hurts to do stuff, and that pretty much leads often to more weakness and dysfunction of our tissues and disability. Other aspects that come up are things like neuropathy and difficulty with blood pressure and a whole other host of problems, and all of these things are kind of feeding into each other and worsening the vicious cycles. So what do we do about that? Let's talk the overview today, and then we're going to go to the details next video. I'm making short vids because I know a lot of you, it's hard to think, the brain fog, all of that makes it really hard to think here. I forgot to mention the brain fog. We know that's a huge part of this too, and that's probably a direct result of the neuroinflammation as well as dysfunction of the mitochondria. So let's just like look at all of that together for a second. Hopefully you can all see this pretty well. Get it into the screen. And so a lot of this we just talked about, so don't get worried about it. I wanted to show it to you in words, right? In the center, we've got the stress dysfunction, the inflammation, the mitochondrial dysfunction, which are kind of core physiology dysfunctions. And then we've got this outer layer of the pain itself, the fatigue, the deconditioning and disability, the difficulty with sleep, anxiety, depression, irritable bowel syndrome. We've talked a bit how all these are involved with each other and kind of roll like a cycle over time, and this problem is getting worse and worse, and that's how fibromyalgia gets worse over time. So what do we do to address that? There's a number of different things, and this could seem overwhelming, but what I want to be really clear is that it's all about doing what works for you when it works for you and going step by step. It's baby steps. You don't have to change everything at once. The whole idea is starting to empower yourself, starting to learn, finding the leverage points that are most important for you so you can start to feel better. And so here are the main issues that I suggest people work on. And there's 7 of them. Sorry, there's 6 of them. The first is healing your gut. Incredibly important. We'll talk in more detail about that in a later video. Another thing is the mind-body healing piece. And I often suggest people start there because frequently what happens is there's so much stress and brain fog and overwhelm that it's hard to think and hard to do anything and hard to even imagine doing anything. And once you start to get into a little bit more of a quiet, parasympathetic, relaxed, focused state and practice that state of mind and start working with negative emotion and challenges and develop some skill and some self-efficacy at working with the difficult emotions that naturally come up with all of this stuff, then it's empowering, and then you're better able to start doing other stuff. So I often suggest people start with the mind-body part, okay? We'll talk about that in more detail too. Improving sleep. That's often an outcome of working on the mind-body thing, because the whole body and mind is more relaxed. There's other aspects to that that have to do with supplements, that have to do with evening habits, that also have to do with medications sometimes. I treat a lot of my patients with medications to help them sleep at the beginning, because it's so important to reestablish that deep restorative sleep, because without it, this whole system just gets stuck and keeps getting worse. So mind-body healing, improving sleep, healing the gut. We're going to go into all of this in detail. Supporting mitochondria. That's a nutrient thing. There are diet things. There are exercise things. Mitochondria are responsive to a lot of different things that anybody can do, and that's actually your cellular energy production. When your mitochondria get healthy, you have more energy, your brain functions better, your muscles work better. Next thing, working on optimizing nutrients. There's a whole bunch of different nutrients that are helpful. These aren't necessarily first-line things to do. A lot of people have limited resources. A lot of people freak out because they've seen doctors who've said, take these 50 supplements, it'll only cost you $400 a month, and who can really do that, right? So there's always a way that this can work for whoever, at your level, depending on where you're at. We find what works for you, okay? So we're going to work this all out. Enhancing tissue function, that can be a lot of different aspects, but hands-on physical treatments, because we know that fibro, there's this increased pain sensitivity, but we also know that people get actual focal pain things, you know, like a spasm that's recurrent in the ribs, or costochondritis, or sciatica. And frequently with the right kind of hands-on treatment, the right kind of stretching, things like that, you can enhance the function of the tissues, you reduce the activity of that pain generator, and you've peeled off one layer. We'll talk more about that too. Finally, enhancing movement and function. Activity. This is terrifying for a lot of people with fibromyalgia, because like, what, you want me to do more exercise? No, what I want is to empower you to do the right exercise, the right kind of movement. And everybody's got a different degree of what that is depending on where you're at and how severe things are. But what I'm going to be sharing is some ways that you can start to find that point for you. You find your edge and you lean into it a little bit. You start to enhance the mobility of your tissues. You do a little bit of exercise, then you do a little bit more. Sometimes a person is so dysfunctional and wiped out from fatigue that they need to work on some of these other things first, like healing the gut or improving sleep or getting the stress hormones under control, before they can even start doing more exercise. So we're going to talk about all of this in more detail. I'm wanting to keep these videos short so that they're digestible and you can internalize them. If you heard stuff that's meaningful for you here, listen to it again. I'm going to unpack these as the weeks go by. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being with me. And comment below, questions below. This is for you, to empower you and help you learn what heals for fibromyalgia for you. Thanks for listening.